Tell me about the development of the Mary Tyler Moore Show and how you decided what the show would be about, who you worked with in coming up with the concept.
Unfortunately, I was very reticent to get involved. My comportment back then was to surround myself with greatness and then let them do the work. And I preferred being merely an actress. I didn't really venture forth with anything in particular. Grant brought Jim Brooks and Alan Burns together as a team, and they had never written together before. I don't know if they even knew each other, but he somehow felt that that would be a good combination. And they and I had a meeting, and I said, I think from my experience on the Dick Van Dyke Show that it's smart for me to play somebody who's close to my own persona, that I don't have to create a character and then try to match that character week after week falsely. And they agreed with that. And they said, well, we're thinking maybe she works in a small television station, and that she's looking to be married, but she's not desperate about it. And I said, that sounds good too. I like that because that's kind of progressive. And then they said, and we think she's probably coming off a divorce where she had lived in in Roseville, Minneapolis, and then moves to Roseville, Minnesota, and moves to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And as soon as CBS heard that, they hit the ceiling. They said, you can't have Mary divorced from somebody. Even if she does have a different last name, they're going to think she divorced Dick Van Dyke. So that can't happen. And so they changed it to a situation where I had been supporting my fiance, a would-be doctor, through medical school, who then turned around and dumped me after he set up practice, which I found terribly distasteful, but apparently CBS thought that was preferable to being divorced.
And they definitely, was it their idea to name it the Mary Tyler Moore Show?
Yeah, all the comedy shows were named after the person who was the head of the show, and I don't consider myself having been the head of the show, but I was certainly the voice of sanity around whom all the lunatics revolved. I was the audience member. I was what was going on in their mind. Well, why don't these people sit down and figure it out, And that's what my character did.
What was done to make sure that Mary Richards wasn't Laura Petrie, other than have her not be divorced from Rob?
It was very complicated. I wore a wig. The first year of the show, I have this voluminous, long, brown hair, because always on the Van Dyke Show, I'd worn it short and in that flip. And that was the only thing I could think of to make her separate from Laura Petrie, was to have had her hair grow. And then in the second year, I guess I got a little more confident that I had some identity other than Laura's, and then I went back to just wearing my own hair. But if you see any of those early episodes from the first year, you'll see that I don't feel comfortable turning my head at all because of this wig. What? You wanted to ask me something? Oh, well, let me just get this out of the drawer. Here you are. I was never able to just relax.
This was also very much an ensemble show. Was that your decision? And
you bet.
Tell me how the ensemble came about, how you found the different people and decided what sorts of characters you wanted.
Well, the credit there especially goes to Jim Brooks and Alan Burns, because they had created characters in their minds, but they were open to suggestion. And one of the very strong suggestions that came in to audition for the part of Ted Baxter was Ted Knight. Now, Ted Baxter, in their minds, was supposed to be tall, dark, and handsome, and maybe not Walter Cronkite, but a love interest for Mary. And then they saw Ted Knight, And with all his pomposity and his bluster and his, lack of a top floor to which the elevator rose, they decided to just leap at the opportunity that Ted offered them. And they hired him immediately. We had a meeting afterwards, and we all just said, yeah. But, it takes really confident people who care about the end result, like Jim and Alan, to let go of their fantasy or their first dream and go with somebody else's idea, or an idea at the very least that didn't come from their heads.
Can you tell me about the other characters, how they came, the other actors?
Well, yeah, we had been through, we had the luxury of a lot of time to cast people, and I think that made the difference. Valerie came in as a kind of a last minute, one more look person, similarly to the way I came into the Van Dyke show. They had been through a number of actresses, and Carl just said, there's something else out there. And we were feeling that way about Rhoda. It was a tricky character because she had to be abrasive and tough and hard-edged, but she had to be lovable, because all your characters have to be somewhat, if not thoroughly lovable, then at least understandable. And we wanted everything for this character. And Valerie came in and was her. Again, Rhoda was supposed to be kind of non-glamorous. She was supposed to be kind of dowdy and schlubby, I think is the word that they used. And Valerie Harper came in, and she's this exquisite person. And it's a tribute to her as an actress that she was able to make herself look the way the writers wanted her to look. And how they, in turn, in the second year when Valerie went on a diet and lost weight, supported that and turned the scripts around so that they could work with this new, improved version of Rhoda, that they could see psychological possibilities coming out of her, wherein no matter how pretty she became, she always felt schlubby. So again, they turned around and seized something that was there and that they respected. Let's see. Gavin MacLeod, the character of Murray, was supposed to have been my nemesis. He was going to be the one who was like a little mosquito picking around at me and feeling competitive with me. And then Gavin came in and was just so warm and embracing and dear that they felt that that was a better thing to write to. And Ed Asner was somebody that Grant suggested. Again, we'd seen a lot of people. And Ed, like me, had not done any real comedy. I think he'd done some plays, some theater somewhere, but not on television, not in movies. And he came in and read once and was, according to Jim and Alan, because I wasn't there, just brilliant. It was just so easy and right, and pacing was superb, and depth and charisma, all of that stuff. And then I came in and read with him, and something happened, and he just lost it. It became lugubrious and tedious. And, So as he was getting up and backing toward the door and saying thank you, and we were all saying, well, thanks for coming in. Interesting reading. He said, wait a minute, I'd like to do it again if I could. And everybody said, yeah, sure. And he did it, and he was superb. He pulled gold out of his back pockets, and he did every single moment he was on camera from then on.
I think everybody remembers that scene between the two of you about Spunk.
Yes.
From the first
Yes.
episode. That sort of nailed the relationship from
Didn't
then
it?
on.
Didn't it?
What you were mentioning, the characters had to be lovable. At what point did you decide you needed to add the Betty White character, who was not the most affectionate character?
Well, Betty was added after Valerie went on to do her own show. And they felt they needed another woman on the show, and they wrote a character who was described as being uh, as sweet as Betty White, but as vicious as a barracuda. And Betty and her husband, Alan Ludden, and Grant and I were good friends. And I said to them after hearing mumblings about, well, we're auditioning and we haven't quite found this character yet, I said, well, why don't you actually interview Betty White? And one of them, I don't want to saddle either one of them with, but he said, but what if she's no good? And I said, well, if she's no good, don't hire her. And they said, well, won't that put you in an awkward position? I said, no, it won't. Everybody would rather be asked and not be invited back than to not be asked at all. And she came in, and with a role that, you see, I'm wrong on this. It was supposed to be a one-time shot. It went on to be a current, a continuing character, because she was so dislikable. She took Phyllis's husband and had an affair with him. And we figured there was no way you could ever accept this character on a regular basis. So it never occurred to them that they would have her back. But she was so good, so great, so inventive, that you couldn't not have her back on. And she became everyone's delicious pixie. She represented all the little evil corners and dark places that we have inside us. And they cheered her on.
So let's back up a little bit and talk about the first episode. How did that come together? Was it the original pilot you shot that was sold and aired? And
well, it wasn't a pilot. It was a commitment. It was the first show.
Okay.
We did a run-through of the script on a Wednesday night for an audience, and we were counting on the reaction to tell us what we had, and they didn't like it. They didn't laugh at anything, and we were all devastated. I went home and I cried myself to sleep that night. I said to Grant, they've got to fix it. They've got to fix it. You know, this was my hope, my dream, my life, everything come true. And he went into the other room and he made a phone call to Jim and Alan, who were still in the writer's room. And he said, fix it, and hung up the phone. And you know, they really made only a few minor changes. I don't really know specifically what they were. I think they did. They had little Bess, Cloris's, Phyllis's daughter, like Rhoda. There was an interaction between them that made Rhoda seem acceptable, because it was said by some of the audiences who had filled out cards that they didn't like the fact that Rhoda was mean to Mary. And so they figured out that if a child liked Rhoda, then she wasn't all mean. There was something in her that could be lovable. A few little things like that, and essentially that following Friday we did the very same show, and it went through the roof, as my compatriots are wont to say. It was a huge success.
And what did the network say?
The network tested it. The network put it in one of those electronic rooms with people who press buttons and watch the show and write things on cards. And it tested and still retains this honor as being the lowest ranked television episode ever viewed in the history of CBS. They hated everything. They thought I was a loser. How come I was 30 and still wasn't married? Wasn't Ed Asner's character Jewish? What about Rhoda? Why is she so mean to Mary? You know, all of that stuff. Trying to think if there was something else I can remember, but it just was all, you know, kind of surface instinctive reaction to that which we have been taught to accept as good and real and truthful. But George Bernard Shaw said, custom can inure anyone to an atrocity.
And this was a year before All in the Family, so it was breaking a little bit of ground in
It
that
did,
sense.
yes, except that I like to think, because it's just so much a part of the tone of the show, that it was never a stand on the soapbox and shout show. It pioneered, but it pioneered without self-consciousness.
But that might explain the reaction, that the audience wasn't used to that
Yes.
sort of a program.
Yeah.
And so the network reacted how to that reaction?
Well, they put us on in a terrible time period, and there was a changing of the guard at about that time. Bob Wood came in as the president of CBS, and he took very kindly to the show. He loved it, and he was its champion, and he gave us a better time period, which was Saturday night, although traditionally that is not a good night because it's date night and people aren't at home. It served us very well.
So the first show aired on September 19th, 1970.
Yeah.
And was the reaction immediately good? Were the ratings good?
No, it built. It built slowly. And interesting about this show, which is so revered, it never became number one. It was never number one. And as a matter of fact, it hovered at around 16 to 20 in there. So it wasn't a starburst.
So how did the character develop over the years, and what sort of input did you have on that?
Again, I didn't really have to have much input because a feast was laid before me every week. There was nothing to complain about. It was fabulous food and it was on time. Once or twice, in the spirit of things, I might have said something about, well, maybe I shouldn't say this to Murray's wife because it will sound like she has no identity of her own, you know, and I'm particularly proud of, and I didn't have any input into this one, but the show where Mary finds out that the man who had the job before her earned a good deal more money, and she takes Lou to task for this, and he listens to her and agrees with her and says that is terribly unfair, and you have every right to come to me and ask for an answer. And, you know, she does her thing that she did. And he says, but listen, would it make any difference to you if I tell you that that man was married and had 3 children? And it made a difference to Mary. Sure, we'd like to see things perfect, and we'd like to see a level playing field. But there were extenuating circumstances, and I loved that about her. I loved that she didn't take the fight further.
And the one I think that everyone remembers where she had an interesting reaction was the Chuckles episode.
Oh,
Tell
yeah.
me about that.
Well, that, oddly enough, that's not my favorite episode, but it certainly did me a lot of good. I won an Emmy for that performance, and I think it is everybody's favorite episode. TV Guide just claimed that it was the best episode ever on television, and I'm not going to argue with them. That was the show in which Chuckles the clown had been dressed as a peanut in a parade and had been shelled by a rogue elephant and lost his life. And it's a loss to all of us at WJM. But as sometimes happens psychologically, in order to cover how much pain one is feeling, people will make jokes, and that's what happened to the people in the newsroom. Everybody was making jokes about, well, thank God the elephant wasn't hungry because, you know, 1 peanut and then you want more and more and more, and everyone would laugh, and Mary would be incensed and say, how can you do that? You have no sensitivity? There was an interesting thing that was happening as we were rehearsing this show, too. It sort of paralleled the story of the script. And that was every time I had to say, and I had to say it several times, refer to a character of Chuckles called Mr. Fee-Fi-Fo, I would lose it. I started laughing. And We really weren't sure, and I certainly wasn't sure, that I was going to be able to get through it without laughing when the audience was in and the cameras were rolling, which would have destroyed our show. Then when we got to the punchline, which is the funeral, the memorial, the body there, and the minister speaking over him, reminiscing about Chuckles' characters, and Mary starts laughing, that would have been impossible. It would not have worked. Anyway, I made it through the show, and I guess I pretty nicely made it through that scene, and it's been admired by a lot of people.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
So what was your favorite episode?
Well, my favorite was the one where everything went wrong for Mary Richards. Up until this point, and I don't think we were really trying to change the tide, but Mary had been thought of as, kind of near perfection. Her taste in clothes, and her shoes were always shined, and her hair was always perfect, and she never offended anybody. And in this show, she woke up and had a cold, and came to the office and was discovered that she had a hair bump. Just one of those little things that you get in long hair that just won't lie flat. And then she twists her ankle. And all of this is happening on the day of the night she is to be nominated for a Teddy Award, which was our Emmy Award. The dress she is planning to wear comes back from the cleaner with a stain on it, so she can't wear it. She ends up having to wear Rhoda's dress, which is too big, sitting there in the dining room, waiting for the announcement to come as to whether or not she was the winner or not. Her eyelash falls off and lands like a big spider on her cheek, and she hears her name called and stumbles her way, because she's wearing a big slipper now, her ankle being twisted and wrapped in a bandage, stands up to the podium, and the first thing out of her mouth is a tearful, "I usually look so much cuter than this." And I just really loved that.
At one point, you actually directed an episode of the series. Tell me about that.
Yes, but you see, I was still in that period in my life where I didn't want to take responsibility for anything other than myself. I wanted things to be there for me. And I forced myself to do it because everybody kept saying, "Oh, you have such good ideas, you should direct." And it was not an easy mantle of responsibility that laid on my shoulders. I wasn't comfortable with it at all. And add to that the fact that everybody around me, everybody in the crew and the cast was so helpful that there was nothing for me to do. It was a non-experience. And I came away from it just, with a kind of a migraine headache about the whole thing, a lot of tension, and they probably could have done it just as well without me. So I never pursued that again.
That one was called A Boy's Best Friend.
That's right.
Right.
That's
So
right.
what about the theme song? That's become memorable over the years. I mean, most people can probably still sing it.
The lyrics and all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I have no idea. I was not a part of that. That certainly came from Jim and Alan. Sonny Curtis is the man who wrote and sang it. And I spoke to him just the other day, as a matter of fact. He spends most of his time in Nashville. He's a good old country boy. And you wouldn't put that together with the sound of that theme, but he is. And he just wanted to call and say hello and tell how proud he was of some of the things, like the women's basketball team in New York recently took on an updated version of You're Gonna Make It After All, with a kind of a rock beat, and he was so pleased about that. And so was I.
How did you feel about the song?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. But I wanted to sing it myself. With a slight change in the lyrics, maybe.
How many times did you have to throw the TAM in the opening credits?
I think
get-
thankfully just the once, because it really was a spur-of-the-moment idea. We were out there in the middle of February in Minneapolis, freezing, so cold that I couldn't speak. The lips wouldn't form the words, and I didn't have to. They just wanted shots of me in action. And I was in front of a department store, and they said, "Oh, look, here, run out into that intersection and take your hat," which I had in my hand, "and throw it up in the air as though this is the happiest moment of your life." And I did, and that was it.
I think that kind of became for that generation and a later generation that discovered the reruns when they were on every night,
Right.
and people could really see the show a lot.
And a metaphor
Yeah.
for every young person starting out.
Yeah, it did sort of take on a new life in repeats. And did the reactions over the years change that you got? People in your own generation,
Yes,
to people in a younger generation, what the character meant?
When the show was on the air in first run, people talked about the show and the brilliant performances from everybody, including me. They gave me some share in the credit too. But now that it has been seen by people who were young adults then, who are now mature, they are coming to me with tears in their eyes or a lump in the throat saying, "You got me through some really tough moments," or "I was able to escape some really ugly stuff that was going on in my home at the time," or "You're the reason I'm in journalism today." And, very few of us are lucky enough to, at the end of our life, know we were here for some purpose. And I am going to be one of those lucky few. I know I served some people very well.
So why then did the show come to an end?
Again, the producers and writers wanted to go on to other things. And at the time, it was incumbent on me to profess absolute belief that this was the smart thing to do, to go off while we're ahead and on top. But I was crumbling inside. I didn't want it to end. Again, it was my family. And I thought, surely there are more stories to be done. They can't have come to the end of the road. And that's true. There were, but they wanted to try new things. They wanted to be movie directors and writers and Broadway, and there was a lot of stuff out there beckoning. And for me too. I mean, there came along Ordinary People, which I would not have been able to do had I been still doing the television show.
So what was it like filming that last episode?